Hello, and welcome to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. This is the little girl that causes us so much trouble while I'm trying to read books, and she wound up in my lap for a minute, so I figured I'd let her up here before we got started, maybe to calm you down. Will that calm you down? Will that calm you down? Really? Okay, bye bye. There we go. I have two dachshunds. My oldest female's about 14 years old, 14 or 15. And this new one came from my sister's kennel in Evansville, Arkansas, but I think she has a Stillwell, Oklahoma address. And she raises the prettiest little dachshunds. And she wanted to give me one out of her out of one of her litters about 6 months ago. This pup's about 6 months old. And she turned out to be a pretty smart, pleasant dog. Uh, I'm reading from my fourth book called Love Endures All Things, and the subtitle is A Love Story from a Teenage Marriage Through Senior Years. And I'm on chapter 2, Homeward Bound. And this book tells about how me and Stephanie met, how we got married, how we had children. This goes through the first 15 years of our marriage, and so it's a good book to read before you get married, help you learn how to deal with things, and it's a good book to read to children so that they kind of get a concept of what's going on later in life. Homeward Bound is chapter 2, and it picks up where I left off about being accidentally got into the Navy and what happened while I was there and why I wanted not to be there anymore. So, and that was the last recording I did. We'll start. Well, before I start, let me turn the ringer off on this thing and make sure we're not disturbed while I read. We spent 2 days steaming back from Malta to Naples. Naples is in Italy. And we passed by the eastern tip of Sicily. It was night when we passed through the narrow sea passage between the toe of the boot of Italy and the Isle of Sicily. I was standing on deck as we traveled through the passage at about 10 o'clock in the evening. My mouth slowly opened wide as I gazed toward the Sicilian mainland. Mount Etna volcano was erupting, and it made a beautiful orange glow running down the mountain toward the sea. And several small pools of bright orange lava had formed, with its smoke raising into the air above each pool. The pools were bright enough to light the smoke up, and the smoke was thin enough to see the pools. The moon shone and lit the countryside with a pale ghostly white, and the orange glow giving the scene an air of the holidays, like Halloween. I had never seen anything like this and probably never will again. Here I am, 73, and nope, I haven't seen anything like that since. It was a blessing. I was 18 and I had my birthday on the crossing from the U.S. to the Mediterranean back in August. On that voyage, I was standing on the main deck at 11 one night and staring out into the slightly foggy night with only the stars to give a slight glow to the fog. As I stood there, a bright glow caught my attention as it swiftly moved across the bow and moved to the side of the ship at what distance I could not tell. But it was easy to see because of the brightness of the object. As it stood off the starboard side, where I was, it seemed to keep pace with the ship. It remained there for maybe 45 seconds. Then the light shot off at a breakneck speed and disappeared out in front of my ship. My mouth fell open as I wondered what I had just witnessed. As I stood there thinking about it, the object returned again. This time it moved faster than before, and as it hovered out in front of me at about the same distance, it began to move up and down and back and forth, far enough to notice the movement. This time it remained for over a minute. It sped off very fast again. It made no sound either time, and I was amazed at what appeared before my eyes. I waited for several minutes to see if it would come back, and to my disappointment, I never saw it again. In my excitement, I ran to our compartment and I asked if anyone believed in UFOs. And to the man, everyone said no. I was convinced that was what I had just looked at. It was very weird, and I never told anyone else about it. I kept that to myself. Once they find a chink in your armor, they can be cruel to a person. That had been about 5 months ago. Now I was trapped in a division where the man over me had nothing but disdain for me. I was so unhappy. I felt a huge pressure on my chest and I longed for my home and family. I had become so depressed, I would have done anything to escape from the torment I felt. I was sure that wasn't going to happen since it had been long after we started the plan to get out. I think it had been almost 5 weeks. The trip back to Naples took about a day and a half. And when we got to the big bay near Mount Vesuvius, where Naples was, we dropped anchor and set buoys to mark the anchor chains. We were there for a couple days, and I was working the Liberty boats when the officer of the day handed me a set of orders and asked me to gather my things into my sea bag and report to the day watch, where the enlisted men came and went from the ship. I did as I was told, and within an hour I was on a Liberty boat going to the Naval Hospital in Naples. When I arrived at the hospital, I turned in my orders and I was given a private room. I was told I could not have any liberty until they had finished with the evaluation. That was on a Friday, and they said it would start on Monday morning. I settled into a routine where I played pool most of the day with several others that were there. They seemed nice, and we were not bothered by anyone in charge. We had a nice nurse who suggested what we should be doing. We cleaned the room early and did what we wanted to the rest of the day. I walked around the grounds a lot. You could see the city of Naples and the bay from the grassy yard that had a downward slope. The hospital sat on top of a hill, a tall hill, on the outskirts of town. It was a very peaceful setting. I discovered after a couple of days that it was a hospital to evaluate emotional problems. I learned that they had brought both Mac and myself to this hospital to be evaluated. I never saw Mac after I saw him on the ship until much later. They kept us separated. We never talked again. The plan that had brought me to this point in my naval tour was a simple one. It started out just like everything else that shouldn't be as a good idea. Mac and I were friends from boot camp, and so we trusted each other. Mac never wanted to be in the service, and he came to be here by a court order. It was the service or jail, and he chose the service. I was here because my father frightened me enough not to say I didn't want to go. So it looked like Mac and I were both compelled to enlist. I, because I was afraid of my father, and he, for fear of the courts in Texas. I never did learn why he had been given that ultimatum. Mac told me he knew that the Navy gave medical discharges to those who confessed to being gay. I told him I couldn't do that and that we talked for and we talked for several weeks. One day we came up with a plan. We would have another man, his name was John, tell the ship's chaplain that he saw me and Mike engaged in a strange activity. We decided that we didn't have to do anything and would still be sent home. So we searched for another week until we found the perfect man for the job. John was his name. He was from Chicago, and his aspirations were to be a hitman when he got out of the Navy. We convinced him he had to be able to lie convincingly to stay out of jail. At first, John to be, didn't want to, but we talked him into it. We told him when to go talk to the chaplain, and we just waited. We had given up on it when I was taken off of the ship. When I think about it in retrospect, I'm glad it was done this way. The sailors on the ship would have beaten us to death had they known what we were accused of by John at our bequest. While in the hospital at the that first Monday, they took me to an office where I sat in a chair facing this kind looking older gentleman who asked me about my family and many other personal questions. He spent about 3 weeks before he asked me point blank if I had engaged in homosexual activities with my friend Mac. I had lots of time to think about what we were doing, and I had changed my mind about the whole thing. But being my age, I couldn't tell him that it was just a way to get out of the Navy. So rather than telling him the truth, which by the way will set you free, I simply denied it every time he asked and in every which way he asked. I spent several sessions with him, and He kept asking, and I kept denying everything. One day he quit asking for me, and about a week later, I was put on a military airplane and sent to Washington, D.C. I arrived in Washington, D.C., and checked into the base and was given liberty every day while I was there. I would get up and have breakfast and get ready and go to town and visit every site in the city. I did this until I was discharged. It must have taken 2 months until I was given an airplane ticket back to Modesto, where it all started about 2 years earlier. Mac arrived in Washington, D.C. about a week after me, and we were glad to see each other again. We never talked about what we had said to the doctors in Italy and pretended, turn 2 pages, and pretended everything was normal. Mac was called to the hearing room first, and I didn't see him that night. I wondered what they had done to him. I was sure that they found out we were just trying to get out and maybe sent him off to some kind of jail. I was not going to lie, so I kept telling them I did not do anything, and I hoped they believed me. I was called to a large room the next day, and there were 3 officers sitting at a long desk. There was an officer sitting on the right and another sitting on the left, back where I was. There was also a man taking notes. So this huge room only had 7 people in it. I was on trial, I guess. They asked me a few questions, like my name and military ID number, and then some questions about the time in the Navy. They then asked me if I had engaged in the activities I was accused of, and I said, no, I didn't ever do anything like that. They didn't give me any indication of what they were thinking, and I thought I might be sent back to my ship somewhere. I saw Mac that afternoon, and he said he was being discharged the next day. The next morning, I was summoned to the hearing room where I was told I was being discharged that day. Mac and I got a room at the Ambassador Hotel that night, and we got drunk. We had our tickets to fly home on the following day. After that, Mac and I lost touch, and I haven't talked to him since. Mac went to the airport first because he had an early flight, and I went later to my flight. I hope you enjoyed this story. That helps you understand a little bit about me and what's going on, and why I say I have had a very unusual life. Next time I present a story, it'll be going home. It'll talk about getting home after I got out of the Navy and what went on there. I hope you have enjoyed this. Love Endures All Things, the first in a trilogy. The second in the trilogy is Love Endures All Things Across the Creek. And the last one in the trilogy is Love Endures All Things, The Deep South. We'll work our way through these books, and you will have seen and heard the whole 47 years that Stephanie and I were married. Love that woman more than life itself. God bless you and keep you, and we will talk again when I present the next or do the next presentation of chapter 3. Goodbye.